background with the Bureau, with the presidency, but it's the end of Reconstruction. So we agreed to remove all federal troops in the South. The occupation will end. The appointment of at least one Southern Democrat to the cabinet, construction of a Southern Transcontinental Line, and legislation to help industrialize the South. This, of course, not going to happen. This, I don't know, that one, that they bought the Gadsden Purchase down there. It was one of the things they buy to complete the Southern Transcontinental Railroad. That takes forever and a year to complete. So, we're left with the New South. The New South is basically one of the KKK, Ku Klux Klan. It's basically going to use tactics of terror to reestablish white rule. The Redeemers are the white governments that come back in and regain control of Southern legislatures and pass black codes, which restrict the mobility of African Americans in the South, and basically require them to have jobs, and it's going to basically make sure that they become sharecroppers they can't really reinstitute the plantation system, but they can make sure that people are basically still working for the old plantation owners, and that the social system of the South is going to be preserved. The social and political system of the antebellum South will, for the most part, be reasserted and reestablished. And Jim Crow is basically, that is basically legalized segregation. And then we see the growth of laws, not just black codes or laws, but laws in the South which basically require, not just allow, but actually require businesses to provide segregated facilities for blacks and whites. That is, I am scared, frightening as it is. I'm old enough to remember going to Mississippi, and it was after civil rights legislation had passed, but it was still not so much, the culture was still there. Or if I walked into a restaurant with a black guy, they would refuse to serve us. Or in some places in the South, there would be a black section of the restaurant, or in a theater. The balcony would be for African Americans, and the downstairs would be for whites. Now, if you wanted to be a really liberal, culturally liberated kind of guy, and say, oh no, the black people who will sit down in the main orchestra side, you are breaking the law. People would arrest you. That's what Jim Crow doesn't mean it makes it possible. It means that's the law of the land. You must have separate water fountains for whites and blacks. You must have separate bathrooms for blacks and whites. That's Jim Crow. That's a different thing than discrimination area. That's what we mean by institutionalized racism. Right? Yeah.
What are the Redeemers, Lieutenant?
The Redeemers are the Southern Democrats that take political control. Basically, especially with Sherman's March to the Sea, you destroy the Southern transportation infrastructure. You basically destroy the railroad system. And the age of King Cotton, the idea that they're going to rebuild the South and they're going to somehow reach, have things the way they were prior to the Civil War, when things were really humming and they had a great market, a strong market for cotton. Those days are gone. Now they face competition from Egypt and other sources on the world market from cotton, and the price of cotton is down. King Cotton will never live again. They will never become rich like they once were off of cotton. The plantation system is replaced by sharecropping. Sharecropping is basically where the plantation owner owns the land, and rather than having slaves, he basically rents out his land to workers, ex-slaves, and they basically, the deal he makes with them is they can farm the land, but they have to give him, usually 50% of what they grow. And it's usually, that the 50% of what they grow is usually specified based on what they can reasonably expect from a harvest. But the moment that you have bad weather or something terrible happens, remember, they've agreed to a certain number of bales of cotton or a number, certain amount of wheat, bushels of wheat or whatever, and if they can't harvest that, they go into debt. There's such a thing as debt peonage. We call it debt peonage. Once a sharecropper goes into debt, he truly becomes a slave, because then he can't leave. He can't basically throw up his arms and say, this job sucks. I'll never see the light of day. He's bound, especially with the black codes. Once he's in debt, he must stay and pay off his debt. So he is bound to that land. His mobility is gone, and he has to work basically for the plantation, the landowner, until he clears his debt. And the system is basically set up so that he won't. So sharecropping is it's not a happy system. It's basically re-enslaves people in the South. We see the growth of northern transportation and industry, and we see also a national banking system in the north. So in the north we see growth. In the south we see the growth in the industry, and we see growth in the national banking system. In your book, in your textbook, it mentions the great economic boom in the north during the Civil War. And some of the questions deal with the economic consequences of the Civil War. So in your book, the story is, we have millionaires, we have this national banking system, we do have debt from the war, wars are expensive, and you have inflation. You have 80% inflation in the north and the south. Basically, southern economy goes down the tubes. Totally. 9,000% inflation means money is not worth anything anymore. And when money's not worth anything more, your economy is kaput, and your government is also. But I went online, and I found this thing, Northern Industry in the Civil War. They do something interesting in this article, which I think is very valid. They say, okay, it doesn't really matter to say that the northern industry grew during the war. Of course, that's not really saying much. But what if we compare the growth of northern industry during the Civil War with how much it grew in the 1850s prior to the Civil War? Or what if we compare the growth of northern industry to the growth of during the Civil War to the growth of northern industry right after the Civil War? In other words, let's not look at how much the northern economy grew. Let's compare it to a normal period where you don't have war. And it does not compare favorably there at all. It says here 10% rise in pig iron, 17% in the 1855 to 60. So you have 10% increase in iron production during the Civil War, and the 5 years before the Civil War you had 17%. So, on one hand, okay, we're having an economic boom. But is it really a boom? Is it a boom or is it a slowdown? Sure, we are growing, but we're growing at a slower rate than we used to be growing. So your book is taking the sense that this is taking the perspective. I must say historians are horrible accountants. They really are horrible accountants. They're basically saying, the economy grew. But, the question is, compared to what? The output in the says here, 22% increase, we're talking about, industries. There's a 22% increase in the 1860s. There's a 62% increase in the 1850s. 3% decline in American output per capita in the 1860s against average increase of 20% for the balance of 1840 to 1900. So they're making the point in here, the economy did grow during the Civil War, and that's what your textbook is saying, and that's the answer you pretty much have to go with on a test, I think. However, you could bring in this comparative angle on a test. That would, your essays are really about sophistication. The only thing is it gets to be dangerous if you write an answer that's more sophisticated than the person who's reading it.
Possible?
That is possible, yes. These are not rocket scientists who are reading your essays. These are, an average cross-section of teachers and some professors. But I would think if you write well, you can make this argument that compared to periods immediately prior to the war and after